Thomas, what do you think about the new music?
Eric, eager. How did that come about? That is awesome.
Yeah, I got a buddy, Matthew Collar, who covers the Vikings he used to cover them for the ESPN station. Now he does his own thing on his own Substack, Purple Insider. If you're interested at all in all things purple, he made that for me, which is always great because when it comes to podcasts and things like that, you have copyright issues and all of that noise. But when your friend does it for you, of course, you can own it there. So for those of you that are new to the show, this is episode 46 of the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager, one of the VPs at Sumer Sports. I'm joined by the CEO of Sumer Sports, Thomas Dimitrov. Thomas, I'm back from Atlanta. I think I have some Georgia-related allergies. I'm fighting through it, though. I can't wait because, look, we tonight are talking about a tough guy position, right? We're talking about offensive line, and by golly, if I can't tough it out for that, I'm really not made for this because that position requires everything in the way of intestinal fortitude. So Thomas, how's it going?
There we go. A little bit of technological issue.
Are we back, Thomas?
We are back. It was like Twilight Zone for you. You were digging in and then you were gone.
Okay, am I back now though?
You're back.
Okay. How are we doing on this offensive line night, Thomas?
Well, we're doing fine. We're ready to jump in. I mean, I've been thinking about it all day, actually. And it's funny when you're in the middle of having a ton of things to do, work related, right? And it's all good. There's a lot of great stuff. But in the back of your mind, you're thinking about being able to talk about O-linemen. I know you were excited about it. I was. I could have really just, thrown the proverbial dip in. Again, I don't dip, and just sit back the entire day and watch players so that we could talk about them. That wasn't necessarily the case. But we've talked on and off about players over the last few days, O-linemen. So I'm glad we're able to finally dig in.
Yeah, for sure. And we just got, if for those of you that are again coming by for the first time, we've talked about quarterback. That's actually our most listened to podcast so far that we've had. Wide receiver, running back, and tight end, a position that I played in college. And now we get to this offensive line here. This is a very interesting market, right? The first thing I want to do before I show the markets, though, here is actually look at something that's been moving for quite some time. If you look at, this is FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, Bryce Young, who was, at the time that we recorded our quarterback podcast, the second favorite to be the first overall pick, he is now currently the favorite at -200 to be the first overall pick by the Carolina Panthers, who traded, as everybody knows, with Chicago for that first pick. If you wanted to bet Bryce Young to be the first pick, you would have to be more than 2/3, 66.6%, confident in that selection if you wanted to make money long-term with that pick. CJ Stroud now the favorite to be the second overall pick. That takes us now to, Thomas, the offensive line market. And these five guys that we're going to talk about today, right now, per FanDuel, Peter Skoronski, the Northwestern tackle, he is a slight favorite at -115. So basically 54 or so percent to be the first overall pick among linemen. He's followed by Ohio State offensive tackle Paris Johnson, who is +110. So those are the two top guys per the market. Who's going to go first? And Broderick Jones, Darnell Wright, Anton Harrison are also guys that we're going to talk about today. All of them are at a value of 8-1 or more to be the first offensive lineman selected. So very much long shots. Just per our friend Benjamin Robinson at Grinding the Mocks. Oh, this is the wrong one. So per Benjamin Robinson at Grinding the Mocks, you have kind of the picks 8 through 10. Actually, this is this is where the market was earlier today on the quarterback position, which had Stroud and Young equal. So that just shows sort of like where this has gone in just a day, right? So I'm prepping for the show. This was one of the offensive line ones, or sorry, the quarterback ones for early in the day. So it just shows like over the last few hours, Young has become an overwhelming favorite. Thomas, when you look at this group, Skoronski, Johnson, top two guys, does that jive with what you're sort of seeing as far as when you're watching film?
Yes. I mean, Skoronski obviously has a lot of positives to him. My only concern, and I don't want to jump into negatives, right? I'm a very positive grader and evaluator. I want to talk about the positives first. Obviously, Skoronski has a lot of positives, right? He gets off fast. He has the ability, the awareness to do what he needs to do in line as a run blocker, of course. And by the way, we all know his ability to play guard. There's a lot of discussion out there, quite honestly, whether he's a guard or a tackle at the next level. He does both very well at the college level. I mean, he has the ability to do both very well at the college level. And, quite honestly, maybe his makeup might be more suitable for him to play guard. Again, he can pull, he can get upfield. He has the ability to break down and do what he needs to do. I mean, when you watch him, ostensibly his arms are a little bit shorter than you would like him. Believe me, I've been around short arm guys who have had really good starting careers in the National Football League, but it's usually, Eric, it's right on the verge, right? Sam Baker, who we drafted way back in my first year as a GM with the Falcons with Matt Ryan, he was always plagued by his arms being a little bit short. So everyone kind of laughs at that, probably in the fan base area. Like, really, is that much of a deal? And it can be if it's an inch or two short. There's no question it can be. And if the players aren't adept, fast and explosive with their hands, and adept at just stinging someone in the chest, and they're not utilizing them properly, well, then those shorter arms are even worse, right? So anyway, I like Skoronski a lot. I like everything to do with him. I just think he's projected to be a guard, and I think that's where he's going to find his world.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Because it was you were a member of the Sloan Sports Analytics football panel this past year in 2023. In 2022, the panel had Mitchell Schwartz on it talking about offensive line play. And for those who don't know, Mitchell Schwartz was the right tackle for the Browns and then the Chiefs, and one of the best right tackles in all of football for basically the balance of his entire career. And if you look back at some of his measurables, both athleticism measurables were not very good for Mitchell Schwartz. And he talked about how, because that was true, everything about his game had to be precise in order for him to make do. And I think that that's the case with a guy like Skoronski. Now, has it been so far? Yes. Like, the guy can't make a false step with those kind of arms because he can't, he can't, rebound as much. He can't use some of that God-given athleticism because he doesn't have the arm size or whatever. I will say, though, and this is interesting, and I want to get your opinion on it. Like, when I was at PFF, we developed this thing called true pass sets, which basically is just looking at pass protection plays when the ball got out after 2.5 seconds, no screens, no play action. He had 175 of those last season at Northwestern, and he only surrendered 2 pressures the entire time. That was 9th best in college football among tackles. That is a very, very sort of that's a very efficient tackle, right? So far at the college level, he's been able to use, that to his advantage. Now, Big Ten, talking about not the greatest athletes as far as edge players and stuff on balance, so the statistics are good, but some of the underlying things, as you said, are borderline. Does that make it hard, given that, we know the surplus value of a guard is not particularly high? Does that make it hard to take him with a top 10 selection in the draft?
No, I don't think it makes it hard to take him that way. I mean, there's some other really big athletes here, good-looking athletes that we're going to be talking about that may have the edge on them. But everywhere we see him, he is going before anyone, right? I keep hearing everyone rave about his ability. And I think that's the full package element. Again, it comes down to the program, right? Not the program. It comes down to the team, the approach. the type of offense they're running, the type of O-line coach that they have, and honestly, the head coach, just the way that they put together their team is going to be important to decide on the type of player they're going to have in that spot. Now, remember, when you're sitting down as a GM and a head coach, and you're trying to think how you're going to put together your O-line, how you're going to build your O-line, we know how important that is to build through the draft, right? We talked about it. Was it a couple months ago? The O-line that's there, instead of going out in the market and trying to spend all this money on a known commodity, you're going to have to develop guys, right? You're going to have to look at the full package. You're going to have to really drill in and make sure that you've worked them out properly. You've worked them out on the board properly. You've done all of your research to make sure that the type that you want to build your O-line around. And I do say this, like we say it about quarterbacks, the best way to come in here with O-line and to build through the O-line in the draft is to think for 2, 3, and 4 contracts, right? Ultimately, that's what you'd love to have. You don't want to take a flyer on a guy. I've never been a big believer in taking a flyer on a guy who's going to be a hit or miss as an O-lineman. And we did it. We did it back in the same year that we took your buddy from your wife's state, Wisconsin, not her school, of course, Peter Kahns, and we whiffed on him, and we whiffed on another guy during the exact same time. If you can look him up. I mean, he was a really good athlete coming out of Mississippi, or Southern Miss, excuse me. And we messed on him because back to being driven by trying to have the best athlete that we can have in there. He moved around really well and did all the things we wanted, but we reached on him, and he ended up being a double failure for us at offensive line. I'll let you a surprise look.
Yeah, you think about like the athletes, I think, is where you get the failure, right? Because it's always it's the biggest learning curve, right? And unless the guy, I mean, Tristan Wirfs as a guy was great right away, right? And that's a dude that was jumping out of pools at Iowa and all this kind of stuff. He's a wrestler, all that. But like I think about Garrett Bradbury, I think about Andre Dillard, I think about guys who ended, or even Jawan Taylor, who got a big contract with the Chiefs early on. It was ugly for him. Yep. Because the athleticism is matched. Because here, like offensive line, especially tackle versus edge, there's never a bigger athletic mismatch than that mismatch at the NFL level, right? So even if you're a great athlete, you're still going to be overmatched by an edge player for the most part. And so you need to have the stuff, you need to have the physicality, you need to have the toughness, you need to have all those things that sort of grow. And so that's where I get a little bit nervous when a guy wins because of that, and not necessarily because of technique and all that stuff. Thomas, that was that lamp, by the way, that was pretty. That was a tenuous situation. That was like a tackle, trying to win in the NFL with athleticism in the first 2 years.
You know what I'm trying to do? I actually broke the lamp. Everyone, not good. Planning has not been good. I have a dog at the door scraping at my door. I'm trying to quiet him. This lamp falls, and I realize that my block is not plugged into the wall, and it says it's going to die. Everyone, please forgive me. This is not this. I have
Thomas will get up. I'll do some stand up here for 5 minutes while Thomas gets up and takes care of it.
Bear with me. 30 seconds.
Bear with us for a sec. So I think when we look at this one, we look at it and say, you have a 32 and 1/4 inch arm. That is a really tough place to win in the NFL. And not saying that you can't win with it, but it is a very tough situation in terms of, do you have any outs to sort of overcome the issues associated with the fact that you are, athletically disadvantaged when you are playing against edge players in the NFL, some of the best athletes that will ever grace an athletic situation, right? So Skoronski is, by the way, as we talked about before, he is the favorite to be the first offensive lineman taken. However, that doesn't necessarily mean he should be, or it's a good gamble, because again, if he turns into a guard, we know that guards on average, the Joe Toonies of the world, they're paid 16 million up to 18 million. That's only 10 million of surplus value, versus tackles when they're at the top of the market, that's 25 million. So again, you have to think in bets when it comes to offensive line play there. This is thinking in bets. I'm going to go to your home state of Ohio. I'm going to go with Paris Johnson Jr. here.
Mhm.
I drew these graphs for you. I didn't make them for the show because I don't like the way they look. But we saw with Skoronski on the left side of the distribution as far as his arm length. Paris Johnson's on the right side. He had 36.13 length arm, 6'6", 313. He played for Ohio State. You know, when he had 165 true pass sets. So again, pass protection plays were no help, no play action, none of that. He gave up 8 pressures, which is 157th in college football. So you have a guy not as productive or efficient in college as Skoronski, but obviously with the size and just the way he moves, you look at him at the combine and pro day, a very, very flashy athlete here.
Flashy athlete, an athlete that everyone thinks that they can continue to build with, of course, moving around, sliding easily, of course, long arms, as you mentioned. I mean, again, everyone's looking for that guy that they truly believe that they can build with for contract after contract. The interesting thing about him is I really want to see how it plays out with him. Where is he right now projected to go? I mean, he's in that early teens, right?
Yeah.
12, 13, 14, 15. But I'm curious to see what team is going to be hot on him right now. If Skoronski goes earlier, who's the next team jumping in? They jumping in on him, or they jumping in on Broderick Jones?
Yeah, and that's really interesting because when you think about the way in which the draft works, right? So Jim Nagy, who runs the Senior Bowl, tweeted out today that he's like, "You guys are all too wide receiver crazy. I only see 1 or 2 guys going in the first round, and when that happens, obviously there's going to be a run on players in the trenches, and players in the trenches, generally speaking, are high. I mean, last year it was like the first 10 picks were all offensive and defensive line, with the exception of a corner." I do think that these guys, Joe, I think you're looking as early as 8 for the first offensive lineman. And then, I think with Johnson or Broderick Jones, you're looking, or Darnell Wright or one of these other guys, you're looking at maybe at like 12 or so. It really also depends upon the quarterbacks. And I think, there's some steam in the marketplace that we're not going to see your favorite prospect, Anthony Richardson, go at 3 or 4. We might see him slide a little bit, in which case that might be a place where we could see a offensive lineman. I think it's 8 to 12 is where you're going to see these two gentlemen go. And that's an interesting placement, I think.
Yeah, I just if there's that run on pass rushers that we think that's going to happen, along with the quarterbacks, maybe pushes them a little bit further. I mean, there's a couple corners that we feel are going to be popping in there, maybe 2, maybe 3. You never know. I agree with Jim Nagy. I'm not real bullish on the receivers, not to get off on another position, but I really do believe that quarterback. I believe that corner. I believe, again, the O lineman will wait just a little bit because I think there's going to be some really solid rushers in that mix at the beginning of the drafts up in the top 10. So I'm going to be interested to see how it all plays out there on the offensive line side, because there's some other offensive linemen we won't get to today, as Jim has alluded to, that are solid. How high they go, that's always tough, right? You when you're in that 20 to 25 to 30 range, you're a lot more comfortable as a general manager pulling someone off the board, and you're thinking, okay, let's continue to grow with them. When you start pulling an O lineman in the top 10, 8 to 12 to 15, there's a lot more pressure on you, man. You are so much more in a spot where you're thinking, I know my owner is going to be breathing down my neck on this one.
Well, and I wanted to bring up this example because I think we've seen 2 guys taken kind of in that top 5 range that ended up being like, the first one was Tony Mandarich in 1989, where he was just an absolute like physical athletic freak, and it just doesn't work for him right away. And then there was another one, and this is more recent, is Robert Gallery, who ran a 4.9. Like, he was the first offensive lineman we saw run a 4.9 in like the modern era, right? And like, he had all this stuff, and he eventually was a starting caliber guard for the Raiders, but no one cared because he was like the 2nd or 3rd pick in the draft. And to your point about that, like, let's turn the clock back to you. You had, and when you talk about the back end of the first round, by the way, the hit rate is 1 in 3, right? Basically, recently, one out of every 3 of those guys, more or less, gets the fifth year option exercise. It's desolate at this point, right? It's hard. But you went and got, McGarry and Lindstrom in the back half of the first round. And I think the saddest part, of course, is that when you were the general manager, they weren't playing well, right? Because of all the stuff you talk about with offensive line, where it takes them a while to get going, and you need to be in a good situation. And not to say that your situation was bad in Atlanta, but now, with Arthur there, they're in a situation to take full advantage of the offensive line too, and their athleticism and their maturation. Like, that's another part of this that's interesting, right? As we move on to Darnell Wright, who 6'5", 333 from Tennessee, 33.75-inch arms. Tennessee's produced some good linemen of late. Trey Smith was a 6th round pick for the Chiefs. Has won a Super Bowl and a starter in this league for a while. Like, they've done a good job there. Above average arm length. One of the things I find interesting, though, is he only had about 100 true pass sets last year. He gave up 4 pressures in them, 67th in college football. This is the guy, again, where once you start getting past, even I think in this class, the first couple guys, they need to go to a good team, and a good team that, much like Trey Smith, the guy can kind of blend in for a while before he becomes dominant.
Yeah, and I've said it a number of times, and I know you believe it. And a good team means a good O-line coach. Again, everyone, it's why O-line coaches are making $1.5 million to $2 million a year. I mean, some of the really good ones. I mean, it's going to be amazing. It is so important to make sure that you have an adept coach there that understands not only the system, but understands being able to really coach these guys. Because, again, they don't have the same amount of time to train and practice like they used to years before in the pre-CBA. So, again, I don't want to beat that point up, but it is legit. Don't ever forget that when you're talking about, the drafting of your O-line. And when you start talking about Tennessee football and you start talking about big old dudes, right? You're talking about a guy who, what's he, 330? What size?
333. The big guy.
The big guy. But the crazy thing is, I was thinking the other day, there are no 50s out there, right? Or at least I'm not seeing the 50s thrive. In the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while, I felt like there was kind of a growing wave of that. I think that whole, 15 to 30 area is a good area to be in. You can be on the top end or the bottom end. I mean, this guy's a big dude. He obviously, he's a big guy who can occupy, right? We know that as a right tackle. His feet have some limitations, of course. He can get upright a little bit and slide off and slip off blocks. You want him to maintain more, right? That lack of sustain and finish, whether it's in the run game or the ability to mirror, slide and mirror, as we talk about in pass pro, there are limitations with him that way. Now, is he still going? Is he going by 25, do you think? I mean,
I think he gets pushed up, right? Like, I think this is, I mean, the hard part is now that we have Lane, so Jawan Taylor went for $20 million to the Chiefs. Lane Johnson is now kind of in that $25 million range, depending upon how you sort of slice it up. Like, I think right tackles are becoming somewhat of a sub-premium position, right? Where if you're happy taking that guy in the back half of the first, like, you can still recoup the value there. Again, this is one where you may want to go to a team that has a dominant left tackle so that you can help the right tackle. I would not, I wouldn't necessarily want him right away to go to a team that needs him to have success for the offense to be competent. You think about, and maybe this is a good thing for you to discuss. Like, I remember 2 years ago when Kansas City lost Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz to injuries, kind of career enders more or less for those guys. I know Fisher kept playing, but like, there was this sort of like dearth of linemen. There was a bunch in the top 15. There was a bunch in 45 to 60, but like, they didn't see a guy who could just like play right away, play competently right away, right? And so they traded their first round pick for Orlando Brown. Orlando Brown wasn't great, but he could at least play average football right away. I wonder if that's, when you think about Darnell Wright, like, what's the likelihood there? There was an interesting thing that happened today. He like DM'd a blogger basically cussing him out for saying he was just a right tackle. I wonder, does that affect anything? Like, is that a maturity issue or whatever? Is that a play right away question that I think is interesting?
Well, look, I mean, we can't get away from the fact when we're grading people, as NFL scouts and as GMs. I mean, it's a big, big deal to make sure that you're honing in on the versatility. And again, there's a difference between the versatility. We used to not laugh about it, but we would have these intense discussions when one of our scouts would just continue to put, a slash on the behind the name of a guy. So right tackle slash left tackle. Every time we turned around, there was a slash because they were just, it was a fence deal, right? They fenced the guy saying, oh yeah, he can play. Of course he can. This was my discussion with you earlier, right? Can a guy truly run? Even if he can take a step, he can run. Can he play? Yes. Is he adept enough to play the left side or play guard in the NFL and help us get through games? That's when you have to start thinking about the adeptness of being able to play on the other side. And, in this league, yeah, again, more than likely he's going to be a right tackle. I hope he doesn't DM me either. I mean, I'll let him hang. I mean, there are good things about him as a player, but he's the prototypical right tackle in my mind. And again, those guys can do amazing things. I mean, I love my guy Caleb McGarry. I think he's a right tackle. He wouldn't get mad at me if I told him he was a right tackle. Anchor in to know what you are. Isn't that Socratic thought, right? Isn't it like know what you are?
And being a right tackle is a couple things, right? Like it might be okay that you're not, but like, does anybody ding Von Miller for being a left edge?
No.
Does anybody, and like, I know Derek Thomas played both sides, but did any, like Reggie White played on the left side of the defense a lot when he played in NFL. Like the reason obviously that you want to be the left side is the quarterback's, blind side. And then but teams don't put their best edge player on the right side as much anymore. So that issue is not, and like, I think about Mitchell Schwartz, like when Mitchell Schwartz played for the Chiefs and won the Super Bowl, like he didn't give up a pressure that entire postseason. He was their stud tackle. It just happened to be that he played on the right. And I implore people a little bit to think about it this way. Like it's not this drastic, but it's somewhat this way. Imagine trying to write left-handed for a living. If you're right-handed, like it is that hard. Like, you played sports. I was a high jumper in high school. Like if you asked me to jump off my right foot over the bar, we have strong legs, we have strong arms, and like, it's not as drastic as writing and all that stuff, but it's significant. And if you've spent your whole career, pushing off of one leg in your kick step, and then they ask you to do it differently, you can learn it, but it's a projection on your end. And what you said and what's stuck with me this entire podcast so far is when you draft an offensive lineman high, there can't be that many unknowns, right? Because there's known unknowns, which is how the heck is he going to pass protect against the best athletes in the world who are playing across the field from him at defensive end?
Yeah, the unknowns are complicated. You just have to really be able to limit them as much as possible. Again, you have to know what you're getting as a draftable guy, right? It's a little different when you're out in free agency and you're pulling people in, right? I don't want to go too far off that way, but believe me, we've been on other sides where you bring in guys back to needs, right? Over needing, so to speak. And you bring in guys that you think we'll bring them in our system. We get them around our coach. We get them around our positivity. At least my last couple of years with Dan Quinn on our group, and we're going to make the most out of these players. We're going to pay them a lot, and they're going to thrive. They're going to have leadership ability. They're going to override some of the younger guys out there. And this could be because there might not be a real strong class of O linemen. You might tend to look and grab one or two O linemen that you really need, and then maybe draft one or two and know that they're going to take some time to be able to to learn and grow and to build. And so, but I will say we made mistakes where we've taken free agents, and it is a bear when you do it. Yeah. I just want to make sure that's very clear. Ideally, bring them in through the young, through the draft, bring them in young, develop them with your right coach. Hopefully it's the right coach. Again, I remember, and I won't even get into the names right now because it agitates when we talk about them, and it agitates me how it went down, right? I mean, you get a lot of people, you get both coaches and personnel men who are like, we need people in here right now along this O-line, and we can we can pay them for a couple years and everything is good. And before you know it, crap hits the fan and they're just not playing well. And then you've wasted, you're on the hook for 2 or 3 years. And then you're past the puke point. Then it gets really, really complicated.
Well, that was what, I was talking to Jack on the Easterby on the phone today a little bit. It was that whole thing. It's like those things make for, desperation makes for some bad cap situations, right? And, we had a really good, I think, a few questions here, but I like this one from William Jones, a frequent listener to the show. Is the concept of the blind side being the best side of pass rush a fallacy, thinking of weak link nature of football? Yeah, I think, it is. Like, your point about drafting is so well taken for 2 reasons. One, that you're never going to get a better value than getting a $25 million left tackle or right tackle for pennies on the dollar in the draft, right? And so Tristan Wirfs is a huge reason that they won the Super Bowl in Tampa Bay, because that you lock him in at right tackle, he's amazing, and you get such a surplus, and then you can go around and take that surplus and put it in other places, right? You can put it at left guard. You can overspend for for a center. Like, you think about the reason the Chiefs can overspend for Jawan Taylor is because they hit on Creed Humphrey in the second round and hit on Trey Smith in the sixth round. Like, you're getting, let's say $25 million of value from those players for a few $1 million. Now you can take that money and spend it elsewhere and fortify those weak link systems. The other part, and this is learned, in my time, consulting for Madden when I was working at PFF, but it's also, they call it teams and schemes. If you change teams or change schemes, it's hard to predict, right? So when you draft a guy and develop him, he likes it in Atlanta. He likes it in the building. He likes the food that the people, he likes your scheme, all that stuff. And there's less unpredictability. You bring a guy in from another program, you just don't know. The guy might be a complete jerk to the other players on the team. He might not get along well. His girlfriend might hate the city. I don't know, but there's a bunch of stuff that you don't know. And that's why the draft is so important. And that's why it's such a spectacle. And that's why if you come to this channel on the 27th, you will see me and Thomas for the first Sumer Sports draft show. Let's move on because we have a couple, about 10-15 minutes left. Let's talk about Anton Harrison for Oklahoma, 6'4", 315, 34-inch arms. He only had 89 true pass sets last year. Gave up 5 pressures, 146 in football in efficiency. So question mark here is, in an Oklahoma offense, how much are you doing what you are going to do at the NFL level? And, does that make the projection a lot harder?
I'd like you to answer that, to be honest with you, because I know you have a feeling about it and a strong feeling about it, because being a Nebraska guy, you're gonna wax poetic about
the hard part about Nebraska is so when I was going there, we switched from the Big 12 to the Big 10, and Nebraska has this problem where they're not tough enough to be in the Big 10 and they're not fast enough to be in the Big 12. So that's why they're not particularly good. But the hard part here is that when you have a guy at that position that hasn't done what he's going to do at the NFL level, as you would imagine, it's just really difficult to project him, right? So a couple years ago, it's Mekhi Becton of Louisville, where he literally had less than 50 snaps or something that were pass protection snaps that were anything like NFL snaps. And you're just saying, well, I'm going off of pure athleticism here, and we'll see how it happens. And with Becton, the jury's still out because he's been hurt the whole time. With Anton Harrison, I think that there's still, a lot of questions. He, size-wise, he's there. I think athleticism-wise, he's there. But the question is can he play the position, which is, what you're paying him to do if you draft him that high.
And he's young, right? I believe he's quite young. I don't know if you have it there in front of you. I should have known that. I swear that's what I had read and when I was doing some studies on him. Yes, his ability. Everything you do when you're in a situation like that is pure projection. We know that. That's not rocket science. You hope, and many times you feel comfortable if you have the right scouts within your group that are working on this position. So I'm not sure if everyone's aware of this. A lot of teams, once they get through the fall and they're evaluating the players, they hone in on a position, right? I think I've mentioned it before. If you have 2 or 3 really good O-line scouts that are specializing on O-line after they get through their area and regional visits during the year, it's a good thing to know that you're a GM and a head coach. You're really relying on those guys to do the digging and do the projecting. It's a big thing, right? Because you are hanging out there. You're hanging out there once again because of systems that you're discussing. But you're going on pure athleticism, pure explosiveness, strength. The makeup of the player is a really important thing. And we've drafted people like that before, no question. Meaning they'll work well. You just, in my mind, have to make sure they have the makeup. They're going to want to work at it as well.
Yeah, for sure. And do you think so? Harrison, by the way, turned 21 in February, so he's young. Like we're talking about a guy who's going to be not even 22 the whole rookie season. So there's a ran a 4.98 in the 40. That's fast, as we talk about Robert Gallery all those years ago. One thing that's interesting, and you were a GM long enough, and you had enough success. You could probably answer this question. Are there places for are there seasons for developmental times, right? Where we talk about Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah last year, like basically re-upped all of his veterans, tried to get on the green, tried to win right away, and then, he's going to figure it out later. And then, there are like the Kansas City Chiefs who trade their best player, they get 10 draft picks, they get younger. Are there and this is probably, for our modeling too, if you think about it, like, are there seasons of development for teams where they can take different profiles of development for players?
Yes. You're just, I want to make sure I got this. You're saying within the program that they're going to be able to take a wave of different levels of the development.
Yeah, so like if I'm like, let's say even let's even reduce this down to the offensive line room, because and we're going to write an article for Sumer Sports about offensive line coaches. I did a for the Cool Clinic, I did a study and we presented it for PFF. Like I'm having been in an offensive line room as a tight end, like those are my people. I'm very like, what if you offensive line? Let's say you have a veteran coach, like let's say you have a Dante Skoronski or a Stoutman or what, or a Bill Callahan or somebody like that, Nebraska legend Bill Callahan, by the way. If you have Bill Callahan or somebody and you have 4 veteran linemen, you're more likely to be able to take in a young player and nurture that player versus, like, let's say you're a first year, or you have somebody like, I look at Detroit because they had Jeff Davidson for forever, and then they went with Hank Fraley, who was a former lineman in the league. And he's like early in his career. If your coach is young and like a couple of your cornerstone players like Penei Sewell or so on are young, do you opt against drafting a guy and bring in veterans? Like, do you care about the composition of that room age-wise?
Well, I to your point, and sorry for not picking it up right away, I am a firm believer in you do have all the different pieces there in your game, whether it's chess, whatever it may be, as an O-line coach, as an offensive coordinator, and a head coach, right? Along with the GM to decide exactly where you're thriving and where you're not. If you have an experienced O-line coach, but you have a number of rookies, of course, you might want to fold in a veteran guy. And quite honestly, that veteran guy could be a little bit long in the tooth. Not really sure what that means. I've used that before, and it's an old-fashioned phrase, but that is something that ends up happening, right? You just have to look at all the different pieces that you have there and decide if you do have a number of older guys along the line. It's pretty darn cool to be able to bring in a young guy and indoctrinate them right away. I feel like a guy like Lindstrom, when he came into Atlanta, he was around some guys that had something to him, right? With Alex Mack being in there and Jake Long, and there were guys throughout there that I thought were really good for him. And I think that's an important thing. So yes, you look at your entire unit, and it's not just O-line, as you said, it's every unit. And you try to get creative with how you can not only have the personality makeup, but at times it's nice to stage where the contracts are coming up, of course.
And you just said what I was going to say, which is also like when the contracts come up, because like if they all come up at the same time, then you're going to lose some guys, right? Just you can't sign everybody. And so you need some staggering just, in that way, even though like, and this was, back when I was a sports bettor, like it was offensive line ability mattered about the same as offensive line continuity, right? And so, when I looked at your line, in Atlanta, and I don't want to besmirch this player at all, but like Chris Chester, like never graded well for us. He was always kind of the fifth best guy in your line, but he played on your team for a bunch of years in a row. And you're like, okay, well, this guy is clearly not affecting your offense negatively. But he's there, and the continuity matters, right? And so there's a part of that too, where that's a huge part of like being, being a functional offensive line. It's not all the guys can be top end players because you got to pay them all that.
Well, look, it's funny when he was coming up to retire, it was a little bit of a sore spot for us. We were wondering whether he was going to retire or not. We knew that it was time for him to retire, but you're never really ready because you're like, gosh, he had so much experience. He got along with the guys really well. He had his own leadership element to him. He was at the tail end of it all, of course, but he probably could have continued to play. And it might have been a little bit of a load off of our mind. And then we wouldn't have gone in and tried to press some of the, the need that we had in some of the free agent, signings we had, because we were looking for someone, drastically to replace. But no, Chris had his place for us for sure, right? There are guys that do have that. They could be the fourth.
Not every player on every team. I mean, because of the salary cap, not every player can be an amazing player, and some players have to be, basically net value of zero. But they play up to their contract, and sometimes, in a perfect world, every player plays up to their contract. But then there's some players that don't have high contracts, and so they're not going to play that high. That's just the way it works, and that's okay. And that you have to accept that, especially in these weak link systems where it's about your weakest link playing better than their potential because of the players around them. And okay, last but not least, speaking of a team that had a lot of great players, Georgia, Broderick Jones, 6'5", 311, 34.75-inch arms. He had 132 true pass sets, only allowed 6 pressures, but 101st in efficiency among tackles in college football. This is one where I think you're looking at a player who's going to be kind of end of first round, early second kind of player. What do you think about him?
I was projecting him a little bit higher than that, to be honest with you. And that's why I think I was getting texts from some of the Georgia faithful who are wondering why you were beating him up as much as you were. Where are we have him at what? What'd you say?
Well, so I mean, and good, like he's 8-1 to be the first offensive lineman taken. I could be way off base here. I know I wanted to look at grinding the mocks to see like kind of where his expected position is. Maybe I'm a little bit low on him. 8-1 to be the first offensive lineman taken. That's not particularly bad. That's a 11% odds. So maybe you're right. Maybe he's more, what would you say, late teens, early 20s?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking he might be. I mean, again, there's an athlete there, right? There's a guy who can, of course, his ability to slide, his ability when he gets out and he's pulling and doing stuff downfield. It's fun to watch, I think, personally. And I see him more as that type of person, continue to grow. I don't know his age as well. I mean, he's one. Do you have it right in front of you there? Because, I was going to look it up, but I'll let you're much better at doing that on the fly.
He's 21. He's going to be 22, like right after the draft, which again, that's reasonable. He's not old. He's not young necessarily, but that's a good age, of course, for linemen. It's
a good age. Look, when you talk about coming out of programs like this, and this isn't me being a somewhat of a homer here. I mean, what was that last thing you brought up there?
So Beat Gamer 99 says he's seen mocks that have him go in the 11 to 20 range. So I stand corrected here. I actually was just looking at the rankings at some of the sites that had him 5th offensive lineman. I think that that has a lot to do with his analytics. But your point, a 21-year-old who's 6'5", 311, almost 35-inch arms. People are gonna gravitate, especially when he's playing in an SEC, right? Like where the conference where the competition is fierce every single week.
That's exactly right. No, there's definitely the upside there, and I think it'll be fun to watch again where that wave is going to be. I think from that 11, as B just said here, 11 to maybe 15 to 16. I'll be interested to see if there's going to be 3 of them. What 3 are going to be there? I mean, again, a right tackle from Tennessee at 330 pounds versus someone coming from Georgia. It's going to be a lot of battles here of where that guy goes, of course. I like this kid's athleticism and his movement. He has some eye-catching ability to him, but I'll look forward to seeing how he plays out.
Yeah. This is a good question that we got from Twitter from my friend Jack Dufflin at Jack Dufflin. I think that this is this is a good question to end the show on. He says, and this is more of a contract value, with how cheap interior offensive line is for second deals in free agency, what is the earliest you would take a center or guard? This is interesting, right? Because we talked about on the show the surplus value and how, readily available players mean that you don't necessarily want to draft them high because you're foregoing the chance to take another player. And yet in this podcast, we talked about wide receiver isn't as strong as we thought. Quarterback, I know you are, and frankly, I am too, but I think you're lower than me even. You think quarterback, I think the market believes there's 4 top 10 picks in that group. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of GMs would disagree with the market there. Peter King wrote in his article, by the way, fantastic article every week, that people believe there's only 15 to 17 first rounders in this draft. I joke about that because that's what they say every year. But again, that's another one. And so with that in tow, like you've obviously taken a guard high before, not super high, but in the first round. Where do you think that drop off starts to go when you can start taking guards and centers?
Well, look, there was a while there where we believed, let's wait till free agency and let's pull people off, right? And let's pay them. Those numbers started going up higher, and we started realizing not only that is we would spend for the interior O-line, because Matt Ryan, I'll use him as an example, he would just get flooded from the inside, and there were times that it would drive us nuts because he was a really good quarterback. But if we were off in a game where they were just rushing the hell out of us up the middle and our interior people getting waylaid, that was a tough thing for us. So we started changing our opinion. Let's get them the way we need to get them. And look, remember everyone, we went out after Alex Mack. To me, that was one of the best free agent moves we had during our regime. It was such an important part. We went after Lindstrom, of course, in a draft. Of course, we drafted a tackle in Jake Long, but Lindstrom was a really important acquisition for us. I will say this. You start getting to the very best at their position or the top 10, 12, 15 in a draft. I'm not worried about taking a center or a guard in, anything from that 8 up to 15. I am not concerned. You start getting higher than that. Of course, that's complicated. Ideally, it's more in that 10 to 15 range for me. But if you find someone that's going to be a difference maker, Dallas did it for when they were rolling with their O-line, man, they were popping people. And I was thinking these, with regard to really good O-linemen, wherever they ended up slotting, like that's a really big, important thing, of course.
Yeah. You're referring to Quentin Nelson, of course, when he was taken 6th. Like that was a very interesting thing, right? A very telling team building sort of outcome, right? Where you get the Jets to trade you 3 second-round picks to move from 3 to 6, which is great. And then, your quarterback, Andrew Luck, is coming off of an injury, so you want to protect his interior, to your point. Then Andrew Luck gets hurt, and now you're like, where did all the premium position players go? And that, it hasn't really worked, although Nelson has been a Hall of Fame caliber player. So it's just, the luck of the draw sometimes there. I'm sure if Andrew Luck is still on that team, I think we think about the Nelson pick a little bit differently. But to your point, it's really hard to go much higher than, in my opinion, probably 15 or so. But I understand what you're saying. The reason also why it's hard to go any higher than 15 is because that 5th-year option ends up being more expensive for some of these non-premium position players than it would be for, it's one of the reasons you saw Josh Jacobs, who has been a pretty good Raider, didn't even get his 5th-year option picked up because it's just like it's mismatched with the market in that 5th-year option role, especially when they have success as a rookie, it becomes more expensive. But it's an interesting question, a good one for Jack, who wrote a really good article this week on 24/7 Sports. So it's been fun. I love talking offensive line. I love just hanging out with you, Thomas. So this is always a highlight. I know it's been a long day at work. I think both of us are probably going to fall asleep in record time after this show. But this has been great. For all of you that have shown up both on, YouTube now that we're on Twitch, obviously Twitter, and the podcast. We really appreciate it. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, give us a review, ask us a question. 5-star review with a question. We'll read that on one of the next shows. We're going to go with defensive line on Wednesday. But again, as I briefly said this, in 17 days, we were going to have our draft show. We're going to start a half hour before the draft. We're going to go all the way till the end of the first round. It'll be myself, it'll be Thomas, a bunch of other people helping out as a part of Sumer Sports as well. We're really excited for that, and just great things to come. We really appreciate your patience today. I know we started off a little bit late, but we really do appreciate you coming in and supporting the show. Do us a favor, tell one additional person about the show so we can continue to grow this audience. And you can say when we become big that you were there first. So for Thomas Dimitrov, this has been Eric Eager. This has been episode 46 of the Sumer Sports Show.